itself. My name is Brian. My name is Brian Sparks. This is the Vx5 Emotional Intelligence course, a course in systemic and transformational leadership. That's the title. Now I'm going to break that down to tell you what that really means as we kind of go along and why I chose this. But that's going to be our journey to see what that really is. But what I would like to know really quick, I know on the feedback journal that I gave you, there's a question there that says expectations. I'm curious, what are your thoughts about today? I know Michael and Drew, they're my buddies, they're here supporting me, they're interested in what I do. Dina, same thing, we've been friends for years and been interested in emotional intelligence. But I'm curious from all of you what this topic stirs up. What are some of your expectations?
Just trying to get some tips, just to balance life and work.
Balance life and work. Okay, that's really good to know because that's common. A lot of people struggle with that. I mean, we live in the most competitive area in the world. And so it seems like if you're in the workforce, that pressure is always on. And how do you get that off you when you get home and balance that out? So you're not alone. So Michael, at the table, you're a big talker. So I want you to talk here.
Well, it's how to better engage with my relationships and with people.
Now, Michael was quiet as kept. He's a very humble guy. He just started a business. Can I share this?
Yeah.
Okay, so he just started a business. He went back into real estate. And so he's trying to talk about competitiveness and balancing that. So the pressure's on. So whether you're here to change something personally, like there's this little shift that you're trying to make a transition in, or you're trying to scale your business, launch a business, this applies. So I know the pressure that real estate agents are under, techies are under, that know that pressure. So I'm hoping this will give you the space to be creative and kind of grow according to your needs. So, Michael, I'm glad you're here.
Thank you.
Drew.
I've got half a brain. And that half brain kind of taking over everything. I'm kind of a full analytical thinker, and emotional intelligence is like foreign. Somewhat foreign to me. Yeah, engineer, but I mean, even amongst engineers, just ultra analytical thinking. And so I would like to do some rewiring of some of that, and I'm hopeful that it will make relationships, both life, children, grandchildren, and with others, better.
Yeah. So I'm a big sports guy, and I love playing armchair quarterback. You know what that is? It's like you look at the game, you have all these opinions of what you should and shouldn't do, and then when you get in the game, I know I couldn't do what those guys are doing on the field. So it seems like the analytical person is me in the armchair saying, oh, you need to do this and then that and be successful. But then once you get in the game, like relationships, it comes at you from a different angle. It's faster. It's harder to process from an objective perspective as opposed to a subjective perspective. And that's where you really start to understand what I've learned, and we'll talk a little bit about today. The neurological levels of intimacy, that's a fancy word, but really the depth at which we can change personally, but also if you're looking at it from a business perspective, how to market. So we can take these insights and apply them across the board, and I'll show you how that works. So I get what you're saying. It's like you get in the zone, you love a controlled environment, but then when it comes to relationship, it's like the formula's constantly changing. How do I keep up? Yeah. Dina.
Well, I just started learning about emotional intelligence a few years ago with the birth of my son.
Mm-hmm. Go ahead. I'm listening.
Just because he's very sensitive, so he challenges me in every part of my emotions. But and then I've also had help with positive parenting programs and stuff like that, and they just teach that kind of stuff. So I just want to expand my knowledge, and I own businesses too. So it does have everything to do with relationships and how you communicate to people and how you can bond with people and stuff like that. So I think it just betters your life being in control of your emotions and learning how to process them. So.
And I know you wear many hats. The times that we connect and I catch up with you, it's like, here's all the things.
I'm trying to simplify. I am. That was our last talk, so.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you're here.
Yeah, me too.
I am interested in figuring out how I can get people in my workplace to understand emotional intelligence better. I feel like I have a good grasp on it and I'm personally skilled, but there seem to be few people in my office, and so I feel like I'm constantly battling everybody else's lack of emotional intelligence, and it's really exhausting.
Yeah, it's like everyone's working from the neck up, and they just don't bring this to work. And it's almost
Yeah.
like the balance that you talked about earlier. It's like if I'm going to survive this competitive market, the workplace, people subconsciously leave this at home. And so they just come, and it's like this controlled environment internally and externally, and there's robots, and then when you try to plug in, there's just, it's like wanting to charge your phone, but you can't find an outlet, and you're running out of time. And so your workplace is no different than probably every workplace. I was going to give a high percentage, but you're.
But for me, it's especially exhausting because I feel like I take on everybody else's like emotions because I'm sensitive to it, and it seems like most other people are not. So I feel like I am extra burdened.
Sorry.
So it's really, really tiring for me, and I'd like to try to help convey to people at work, you know, why emotional intelligence is so important and how it would actually make our work better if people were more mindful of it.
Yeah, the buy-in. So real quick, let me camp on that for a second. What I've given you here is an edited version of new content that I've put together that's the culmination of my work over the last 25 years. Some things in here we're not going to cover, but one of the things we're not going to cover, but it's in here, which I find interesting that may be helpful in terms of buy-in at work, is there's the stats and the research that I've done. So there's a couple from Harvard, there's a couple from, I think it's Smart Source, whatever, I forget the name, but you can take a look at it. We'll cross paths with it. But a lot of people who are very intellectuals, they want to see the numbers. The trouble with measuring emotional intelligence is that most of the surveys and research that is done is done by way of self-assessments. So they slide this paper out, people, give their opinion, but based on the classes I took in methods of research, the self-assessments are not valid because the way that people look at themselves isn't the way that it's been measured over time. And then when you start charting emotional intelligence, because we're so different and there's so many variables, the confidence level just completely drops. And that's, you need a higher confidence level in order for research to be effective. And of course, then as you expand out research, you get more general and get away from the individual. So it's not really been, it's interesting when you can look at numbers. So for example, someone comes in and they hand out a survey and they are able to graph the survey, and based on people's answers, the results are at this level. And then post-survey, they hand out another one and they're able to graph, oh, we have this improvement. That's when you really understand research, and just on a very basic level, you can see, well, that's not really, valid. But it's cool to see it when you're selling it. So if you're having trouble getting people buy-in, I didn't put numbers in here anyway. So, but I get what you're saying.
At least the problem with my colleagues is that some of them are really not self-aware. So even if they filled out a survey, I don't think they would even know what is the reality.
Yeah, and
They have one perception of themselves which is completely different from reality.
Yeah, it's true. And I think one of the biggest pain points in America is a lack of self-awareness. So we'll talk a lot about that.
Similar situation, work environment, a lot of conflicts. Looking back, I do different types of projects with a lot of groups. My last project, I miserably failed in bringing the team together. So it is more for me to learn as to what I can do to be successful in that environment. What I heard that, yes, you are aware of it. I guess I'm the opposite of it. I wasn't aware as to what the needs of the team was and why I maybe did not do enough, whatever the reason. I just want to improve myself, know more about emotional intelligence, and do better on my next project.
Yeah. I'm really excited to share something with you, but it would unravel my whole introduction. So
I see.
just stay tuned. I'll look at you. I'll go, okay, now here's what the feedback I have to give you. But it sounds like you two are in the same boat, is that you're trying to go to work, not take on all that energy that's going on around you, where people are disconnected. Then you're trying to harness it and lead them to a particular outcome. I think there might be a few jewels in here for you. I want to warn you, I'm still trying to perfect the large amount of data and experience and insight that I have in this, not to toot my own horn. So at some point, it's going to feel like a data dump. Like, here's this information. I'm really learning, trying to slow it down. As I'll mention in a minute, I truly believe that wisdom that really helps is simple. So if I said to you, what we really need to do to become more emotionally intelligent is to pause, done, end of class, people would go, what? That's it? Yeah, pause, that's the answer, we're done. You came here, downtown San Jose, to hear that one word, pause. No, it's got to be smarter than that. No, that's it. Pause, that's the answer. That's one of the tools that we'll talk about later, but it really is that wisdom that allows us to grow from an emotionally intelligent perspective is really that simple. And that's, I've taken the information and tried my own cooking, see what's worked. And what works for me may not work for everybody, but I've tried to tap into those wisdoms that do universally apply. And I've come to find out they're not complicated, they're actually pretty simple. And when you hear it, you will say, well, I knew that. I knew that. But what happens is people get tunnel vision at work. And they forget that the simple things of life is what are the most fulfilling. So we'll tap back into it. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm pretty much not limiting myself, so I'm very curious to see what other people are asking.
So wide open mind, wide open spaces.
open mind, yes.
Okay, I'm glad. I'm glad.
Yeah, I kind of feel that there's no limit to this topic, so that's.
And actually, that's a great assessment, because really my goal is to get you into a creative space. So a little bit about me, so that's a great transition. So a little about me, I'm a business consultant with Renaissance Entrepreneurship Center. I help people make a transition from the work environment to starting a business. And I've been doing this for about 5 years, but there's a lot of other things that have been pouring into my life that kind of make me who I am today. My focus is really to share with you the space that I'm responsible in helping people transition. So real quick, you have this on your handout. I'm not going to read it to you, but our goal today is to kind of become more aware. Open our minds, be in that space of like curiosity. Like, what else can I learn? What else can I share with others? How can I connect with other people? And what you'll hear me saying a lot is come out of our comfort zone. You'll hear me say a lot of words like tunnel vision and things of this nature. So let me kind of share with you a little bit more about what I do and how this is so beneficial to everybody. So as I mentioned to you, I help people start businesses.
Just a quick question.
Yeah.
What's the significance of Vx5?
So I'm going to explain that. And this is where it's going to get really cool. This is the part where I'm going to point back to you.
Okay.
So I'm going to explain that. So about 6 years ago, I came to a point in my life where I figured I wasn't doing what I was supposed to be doing. I kind of had that aha moment. And I decided to, at the time, leave my job. I wanted to start talking and focusing more on personal development and leadership. I've just always had this attraction to it, always really focused on it. So I went to a mentor of mine and I said, he's been doing this for over 30 years. In fact, he was a professor at San Jose State and now continues to work as a consultant. So he's been a mentor of mine. And I said, what does it look like to do professionally what you do? Because I love this. Because I could do it for free or I could monetize it. Doesn't matter. I just want to do that. So he had all these suggestions, and one of the things that I did in the process of the suggestion process in the transition period is I applied for an incubator program at Stanford. And I told them this is what I wanted to do, and they accepted me. And before I go any further, Kevin, my cameraman, he was also in that cohort a few years after or before me? I think he was
Before you.
Before me, okay. So this is Kevin, he's my camera guy. He's
Hello.
runs the camera, he does marketing, and I was gonna give him like 10 seconds to give a little elevator pitch about what he does. But I wanna thank him for showing up today. And if you have media questions, you can direct it to him, because I'll talk a little bit about content, and putting yourself out there, being vulnerable. Michael, I know you've talked a lot about, what does it look like to market myself a little bit better. Kevin may be able to field those questions. But I've known Kevin now for about 4 or 5 years, and so he's a great guy, great with the camera. So thanks for everybody.
So my name is Kevin Williams. I am currently an undergrad working on my psychology bachelor's at Palo Alto University. I'm here to help Brian. Does anybody have a problem with being videotaped or pictures?
Back of your head.
Back of your head.
Okay.
Maybe
So
we
that,
can put zoom in or something.
I don't like this bald spot right there.
Photoshop, I got you.
yeah, when this is done, he's going to give me a full head of hair. So, but thank you.
So other than that, just, photo, video enthusiast turned professional. So here I am.
Great.
And thanks.
Thanks, buddy. Yeah, so get his card. Did you bring me cards?
I did bring a card.
Okay. All right. So I got accepted into the Stanford Incubator Program, and they helped me put together a business plan, connect me with resources, and at the end of the program, I pitched the idea to a full house at the law school, and one of the judges who was evaluating my business plan and my presentation was the director of Renaissance Entrepreneurship Center, and he says, we need that emotional intelligence consulting. Because what they do is they take people, I'm just going to use the circle to kind of represent, our habits, lifestyle, right, beliefs, just, the way life is now, the way we see the world. So that's what my amazing drawing there represents. And so what this also is comfort zone, another word, and I'll use these words again, that's why this is important. Controlled environment, a mentally controlled environment. And so this represents what you do on a day-to-day life. Your day-to-day life, you go to work, you go home, you have your routine. This is a comfort zone. Everything that you do on a day-to-day basis, and I'll unpack this a little bit more, so you don't need to start taking notes now. I'm just kind of giving you the space at which I work and what we'll talk about today. And so then what people want to do is they want to start a business. Okay? So they want to go from this to this, and we call this a fancy word. They want to change. Now this B over here, which I put for business, doesn't necessarily have to be a business. It could be some other desired state. So let me give you some examples. It could be going from a particular way of eating, you're not happy with the health, to becoming more healthy. It can go from being a role at a job to becoming a manager. What does that look like? It could be going from being single to being married. It can go from working for 30 years to retirement. So if you kind of just insert what you shared with me, this not only can happen at major times in your life, but it can happen day to day. Sometimes the change is voluntarily, like, okay, I'm choosing to take on another role at work. Or I'm choosing to leave a relationship or get into one. And I'm mentioning significant emotional events, but these also could be little things. The shift from going from work to home, micro events, some things that we're not even aware of. So there's constantly this change in our life. So what we're talking today is becoming more aware of change that happens on a day-to-day basis or over a lifetime, the unconscious change, and the conscious change, like the choices we decide to make. Here's the thing. It doesn't necessarily need to be intense. What we need to identify is the significance. So the difference between the intensity and the significance may be what you assign value to. I will get to that. The difference between a current state and desired state can create, now I'm going to give you a real fancy word. I'm just gonna put it up here as what's called CD. This is where I did my research. It's called cognitive dissonance. Are any of you familiar with that term? If you've ever taken Psychology 101, you've probably heard the term before. So cognitive dissonance is a fancy way of saying stress, conflict, dis-ease, not disease, but you can kind of use that as a metaphor. And so you may have a current state that you need to know changes, or a current state that you know you need to expand awareness on, kind of like you were sharing earlier. It's like, okay, I see something needs to change, whether it's me or in my environment. You see something and you have this desired state. And I've noticed this in all entrepreneurs, is they come in with great ideas. And they say, okay, I have a shoe idea. And it looks like this. I want to take over Nike. I want to be #1 in a year. I want to hire 200 people. It's this great big idea. And then you have other people who will come out of watching a Rocky movie and they say, oh, I want to lose weight. I want to get in shape. I can hear that music playing in my ear and I want to start running down the street and do what it takes to overcome it. And the music's playing. And again, they see it in their big mind. And then when they start to go to the gym or make that transition, that initial motivation kind of goes, this isn't what I expected. So people come into Renaissance, or they come to me with their idea, and it's really fun when it's up here on the big screen of the creative mind. And then you have to kind of condense it into that one actual step, and it's different. It becomes overwhelming. It's no longer safe. It's no longer creative. Because creativity is very healing. Sometimes when you're hyper-focused or you're feeling a certain way over a long period of time, it's such a relief to get away in your own mind. Sometimes the greatest feeling isn't taking a vacation to Fiji for a month. It's just the ability to get away with your mind. So that creative state can be so healing, but it can also become addicting. So it's a double-edged sword. So my responsibility when the director of Renaissance said, we need you, is that they said, look, we have great numbers. And over the last 5 years, I've been a part of these numbers. It says 44% of the people who come through Renaissance start businesses. So that's almost half. They get classes, they get resources, they get a new environment. Here's a great number. That number of the 44% who start businesses have a sustainability rate of over 90%. But what I've learned, and that we encourage people to do, is the intellectual capacity. In other words, the ability to change or start a business isn't that high. Because I've seen doctors start businesses and fail. But I've seen people who don't have a high school diploma set out on a business venture and succeed. So what is it? It's this space right here. It's how they manage the dissonance. It's how they manage the stress. This is where EQ, or emotional intelligence, is so valuable. It's in this space. And if you can get not only yourself to get buy-in to this, and I'm talking to you now, this is that point. If you can get yourself first buy-in to this space, you then have the empathy and understanding and the capacity to get others. When it comes to leadership, one of my favorite terms that I use in describing the very first step of leading others, because it's a whole other process of leading yourself, but leading others is what's called pacing and leading. The ability to truly understand where someone else is, how they see the world, what are the values that motivate them. What are those things? Do we have the awareness in ourselves to see them in others? Seek that understanding without overlapping our beliefs over theirs, kind of setting those aside, understanding it, and what moves them to the fulfillment of their values. Once you can see beyond the surface, now on a neurological level, surface understanding is very important. In fact, it's called the environmental level. It's very important. But if you can set that aside and then see their values, we'll look at that a little bit more as we go on. You can pace with rapport and empathy and ultimately lead. That's how you, in the beginning, go into a team, start to pace the culture, pace the individual, and then lead them into another direction. Now you could come into and give a presentation and say, look, here are the numbers, and tap into the value of success in others and say, okay, we got buy-in. That's one way. But that percentage of success is very low. Because look how long it took. I'm going to speak to you because you were the last one to register, so I looked you up. You're involved with people who deal with tobacco or something. I saw that on your profile.
Yeah, tobacco control for the county health department.
Look how many years, decades, it took people to get buy-in to that being an unhealthy habit. And now there's a trend going another way, back to this vaping thing, and that's another problem. People believe that they're getting buy-in and that's safe. It's a problem. So nonetheless, this is the space that I work on. This is the space where we will talk about today. So what I know for sure when it comes to leadership, once we understand this in ourselves, and once we understand this in ourselves, like where we're going, and we can gain insight in here, we can share it with others. And so whether it's yourself, your family, your business, your community, I talked about the simplicities of this application. These are little insights that are universal across the board. So now you asked me, what is Vx5? So real quick, this is the emotional intelligence definition that first surfaced in 1990. It's in your booklets. I shared that with you. I kind of modified it a little bit. And this is what I had to add to it. I'm not trying to change it. I'm not trying to reinvent the wheel. I truly believe that there's a lot of usefulness in this definition. In fact, in and of itself, I think it's useful. But I want to add a little something. The ability to monitor and validate one's own and others' feelings and emotions, to discriminate among them, to use this information to guide one's thinking and action toward the fulfillment of values. You can see, and this definition has been taken on by other emotional intelligence researchers and practitioners and modified in other ways, but this is one of the originals. I just added a couple things. I wanted to kind of give you that visual. It's in your packet, so you can kind of take a look at it. I'm going to bring that out, the differences, very closely to you. One of my backgrounds in the last 5 years is studying also what's called systems therapy. I've been a part of the Virginia Satir Global Network for the last 5, going on 6 years, studying with the president of it. I was connected with her. It was really an awesome experience. It is an awesome experience, but really what systems therapy is this look at how parts work together. So for example, if you look at the family dynamic, everybody in that family is playing a role that creates the family dynamic and ultimately creates repetition over generations. But the same dynamic is true within ourselves and larger cultures. So I'll kind of reframe that for you and see how that will be useful for you. So here's Vx5 Emotional Intelligence. Now, as I said earlier, I really want to focus on the things that are simple. Because the things that are simple draw upon your own wisdom. The things that we know that are true, they draw upon your experience. Excuse me. They draw upon your experience and integrate your experiences in order for you to have the best possible outcome. One of the things that I hate hearing over and over again is that we have events in our lives, like for example, I'm going to use your example, but I'm going to kind of make it my own. You had this experience where it didn't go well with your team. The book that I'm currently putting together is actually called Fail and Grow Rich. That title is inspired from a point in my life where I was really at rock bottom myself in my teenage years. And I read Napoleon Hill's book, Think and Grow Rich. You're all familiar with that? One of my all-time favorite books. You can get it here at the library. In that book, it said every adversity, every failure, every heartbreak carries with it the seed of equal or greater benefit. And I said to myself at that point, wow, what if where I was at, I could get to this space? I didn't know what that was. There wasn't business in here. It was just blank. But I said, what if? What if? And people would come along to me that a lot of soldiers go through. People who go through intense experiences together, there's this bonding that they have for a lifetime. It's because at rock bottom, you really discover what people value. And when you discover what people value, they naturally are drawn together. So, in that experience, and proceeding out of that, being where I was, rock bottom, to my journey of where I wanted to be, I've put this together. What are the wisdoms of all this research, this study, this personal reflection? What does it look like? Now, look, you can see the 5. This is what's called branding. This is just what's called marketing. This just signifies Brian Sparks. So the VX5 is, again, it could be something else. And what I share with you today, I want you to make your own. So I could have easily, if I wanted to, just change this to an acronym. It could have been Brian, B-R-I-A-N. And I could have used other words. I could have substituted vulnerability with bold, or R with resilience. Beneath these words are substances and experiences that we can all apply and find applicable to ourselves. So I want you to seek that out. So this is not the only way, but you will find the spirit applicable to you and that you can make your own, and that's what I would love to see happen. So what we'll cover today are 5 different perspectives that really uniquely blend together to give you that creative space and that ability to grow and be emotionally intelligent according to the definition that I shared earlier and is in your packet. So starting with vulnerability, we talked a little bit about this space where we come out. And in your packet, you will see a quick definition of every other word here. But I'll show you how these integrate and come together so that ultimately at the validation piece, you can take that first step. So values is really at the core of our why. Well, let me back up a little bit. Vulnerability is stepping out of your comfort zone, basically. Values are the things that motivate us. So let me give you an example. A value would be family. If I say the word family, and I ask you, what's the first thing that comes to your mind? One thing I can guarantee you is that you didn't think of my family. You thought of your family. So the belief and the experience and the expectation that came to your mind is going to be a lot different than mine. What I've learned when it comes to pacing and leading and negotiating and conflict resolution and integration or inclusion and diversity, that the ability to identify values and speak beyond the personal experience is the ultimate form of respect and rapport. It's where it begins. So you can find common ground at the value level while honoring the different experiences. So that is really at the hub, the starting point of negotiation, conflict resolution, integration, and inclusion. So this will be fun as we go through this because you'll be able to identify your values beyond your personal beliefs. Vision. This one rubs me very raw when I go to sales meetings and conferences and they talk about vision. I get so angry at this point because what they'll usually talk about is cast a vision. Get excited about the future, and they'll talk about how it's so important to be able to look forward and see all this great stuff and then step into it. I love that, but then they stop there. And that's what irritates me. Because what you then do at that moment is you have these people in their comfort zone, and you're moving this desired state further and further away by creating bigger promises that are unfulfillable when you take that first step. It just creates further frustration, greater stress, but it'll keep them coming back. It's an amazing marketing ploy, and it makes me very angry. I'm going to share 4 different perspectives with you on the importance of vision. And then voice, we'll talk a little bit about the power of communication, how we listen, how we process, and then how we speak. And then finally, validation. This is the action step. Because we can sit up here in the controlled environment and we can say, oh, it could look like this, and we could, I love to geek out about this stuff, but what does it look like that first moment when you cross the threshold of your comfort zone. And now you're vulnerable. Now you're vulnerable again. You're vulnerable again. So these have a cycle. And we'll talk about that. So at this point, any questions? Any feedback? Any ideas? I see you writing. I hope you guys are writing on the left side of the sheet when it comes to the journal. Okay, all right. Vulnerability. Let's open to that portion in your notebook. Okay, I gotta be mindful of time. How are we doing? Okay, 10:30. Okay, so vulnerability. So as I start talking about vulnerability, I would love to ask you, what are the first notions or ideas or judgments that kind of come to mind when you hear that word, vulnerability? What do you think about, oh, the laser doesn't work. That'd be real cool. Okay. Vulnerability. What are your biases when it comes to vulnerability? As a manager, what do you think when it comes to vulnerability?
I don't want to show it.
You don't want to show it. Yeah.
Because I lead the groups, and if I show, I mean, don't get me wrong, the night before, I sweat. But really, yeah, when I'm in that meeting, I don't want to tell them that I'm not sure what I am going to do or how I'm going to take you from your current state of project to the next stage of project. Right or wrong, but definitely no one should.
So what is so are you familiar with the term masks? You ever heard that term before? Like put on a mask. You all familiar with that
Yes.
term? Everyone puts on a mask. What mask do you put on to like cover up that, I don't know if this is right?
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of moments in personal life and in business where you are not sure.
Mm-hmm.
And it's difficult to go in and say, oh, I'm not sure what I'm going to do here, because there are people who are paying attention to you, they are there to listen to you. And
Yeah.
that's,
The problem with that is, you might have some people there that as you go through it, might really have the answers for you and be able to really positively contribute. And if you appear to be vulnerable, it's like, oh, he knows it all, or thinks he knows it all, and he's not going to listen. And so sometimes by being vulnerable, then people go, oh, he recognizes he doesn't know everything. And you hope that people that are below you too, some of them are vulnerable and recognize they've got their own weaknesses. But you can create a culture that people feel like they can contribute to better.
That's a great point, Drew. And I'll tell you how I back that up. So that's a great space, is take it off. So one of the things that I do, I try to do when I speak, whether it's to 2 people or 200 people, whatever it is I really try to open up from a humble perspective. Like, I'm not a note guy. Even though I have this is more for you. I'm a creative guy. Because if I have to stay up here, I'm in trouble. I forget. I don't know where I'm going to go with this. And so I really start from a place of vulnerability. I try to make jokes. I'm often making jokes about my hair. There's always that person in the crowd who says, well, you don't have hair. So, it's like, really? But when you start from that place of vulnerability, we're starting, and the reason why I'm using, thank you for being so vulnerable right now, is this back to that position of pacing and leading. And what I'm going to share with you now, with your great example, is like, what is it that we're doing? Why is it when we go into a meeting or any situation and we just aren't able to let go? So whether it's approaching a meeting or that inability to forgive somebody, this principle applies across the board. Is what we're doing. So I'm going to start from a position of what we're doing, and then we'll kind of transition into how we get beyond that. Because I could easily say, again, here's one of those words that reflect hyperbole, is, hey, just let go. Don't do that. But I want to unpack that, because the simplicity of letting it go can give us insight. And in that insight, we might be able to find that one little spark that goes, oh, I see it. I see it, I see it, I never saw it, I heard the words, but now I see it. And so what we're doing right now is we're living in our comfort zone. And this little circle, my pathetic circle is similar to this, is our understanding, our beliefs, the way we see the world, based on the people and the experiences, the significant life events that has shaped the way we see things. And the way we see things, the way we experience things, the way we understand them, carry expectations. And so we do things, managing behaviors, we do things in order to stay in this zone and maintain a feeling of certainty. Now this is very heady, but this is legitimately, on a very simple level, this is what's happening. Again, significant life events, and that's a general term. So significant life events, what we have a tendency to do is continually surround ourselves with people, places, and things that are significant, that allow us to maintain this comfort zone, this internal controlled environment, where behaviors ultimately give us that feeling of certainty. Now, if you want to go to extremes, in order to maintain a feeling of certainty, sometimes managing behaviors, or habits is another simple word, are very destructive. They can be addictions, secrets, bad behaviors, destructive behaviors. Some can be very good. They could be workaholism, working too much. But though they may be extreme, they also may be subtle. But the importance is significance. And there's a lot of behaviors. That's why I call them parts of our experience. There are a lot of beliefs and things going on within us that make us who we are. Let me simplify that. I was too general. Have you ever been in a situation where a part of you wanted to do one thing, but a part of you was kind of in conflict with that part and wanted to do another? I'm sure if we sat here long enough, I'd see you all go like this. We have internal conflicts. Do I do this? Do I do that? The example I gave earlier was the example of, well, I love In-N-Out Burger, but I know I should be going and getting a salad. Right? I'm trying to lose weight. I know I should be getting up an hour earlier and running. Got a half marathon coming up in a month. I need to be running more. That's me. So there's things I should be doing, but I get in these routines and I maintain them. So those are a little less subtle. So the managing behaviors, one of the very first things I do when I work with people is I have them do a time management chart. Where are the things we're doing over and over again, getting in this routine, I say wasting time, but what I mean by wasting time is that we're not thinking consciously about what we're doing. So a lot of times, understanding or managing behaviors is slowing down. Remember I said earlier, pause. What if I just told you that managing your behavior and change just came with a pause? We've been talking now for about 40 minutes. Now that word pause has a little bit more insight and significance because these managing behaviors are just happening automatically. The person who puts you in your position, I keep picking on you, I'm sorry, but you share. The person who puts you in your behavior, they expect you to execute and do things routinely so that there's a progressive flow that trends upward. So managing behaviors also have progressions. Progressive behaviors, progressive habits, but they then at some point slip to the unconscious level, like we just become unaware of it. And so when I slow people down with just a time management chart, the simple things, it usually irritates people. Like, this is stupid. Why should I be doing this? This doesn't make sense. Why am I, and then they justify pushing it away. But really what I've done is taken them out of their comfort zone. And when they're out of that comfort zone, there's an opportunity to examine really what's going on. Again, the simple things that we sometimes just overlook. So, we have the managing behaviors, and we have this consistently feeling of certainty. I'm in control. Life goes on. This is what's happening. This is what's happening in all of us, consciously or unconsciously. And we have multiple parts. It's called a belief system. Multiple parts working together in order to manage our habits and our lifestyles. So part of the satir process and systems therapy is getting these parts to work congruently together so that you don't feel like you're in conflict with yourself all the time. And more importantly, once you get them to work congruently, you develop a clearer conscience, a more creative conscience. So this is the beginning part. Here's where the problem happens. Now this is a lot. You have it in your book, and I'm just going to quickly go over this. There's a vulnerability contact, and that's when we cross the threshold. Really quick, what's going on. And just to kind of let you know, this is kind of, when you were all back in college, a survey class. That's what this is. So again, it feels like a data dump. The intention is get in contact with me. We can unpack this. We can identify certain areas in our lives where I like to go a little bit deeper, or sit in that area. Whether it's me, friends and family, community, at work, this is just a survey. That's what this entire class is about, to introduce you to it. It's going to feel like a lot, but cherry pick. So the second we cross the threshold of our comfort zone, there becomes a triggering event, whether it's a choice or otherwise. So for example, triggering event, pain point, or fear of event. There's a difference between being rejected and the fear of rejection. Think back in a time in your life where you were afraid to do something, and how that fear built up inside you, and how it felt, and how from that fear, justifications of not doing what you were supposed to be doing continue to be reinforced. And then, looking back over your life, you kind of regretted maybe not doing that. There's a portion in the beginning of your handout of one of my favorite books. I think it's called Letters from the Dearly Departed, of the 5 regrets of a hospice nurse who was working in that industry for over 30 years. What she discovered was people were getting ready to pass away. They usually had to do with relationships and a fear of not doing something, but they all had to do with regrets. So what we do is we justify staying in our comfort zone, or when we get out of our comfort zone, going back. But here's the let go process. There's a difference between being rejected and the fear of it. The second we step out, sometimes there's a release. And the pain of being rejected is never as great as the fear of being rejected. I remember when I was a kid, I was in 8th grade. No, I was in the 7th grade. And there was this girl, her name, I never forget, her name was Brandy. She was the prettiest girl in the school, and I wanted to ask her back then to go around. Remember those words? Go around, go steady? I don't know. And I was a 7th grader. And I'm just going to go for it. Because all year I was just scared to ask her. We were friends. We had one of the classes together. And at one point, I eventually convinced myself I was going to ask her. And before PE class, I ran up to her and said, "Hey, Brandy, do you want to go around?" Now, up until that moment, I was scared to death. I talked myself out of it for the entire year. But at that moment, I'd had enough. And I went up to her and I asked her, and she said, "No, thanks." But it wasn't the rejection that crushed me. Because actually it felt good. It's like I did it. I was vulnerable. I put myself out there. I was so proud of myself. What haunted me was the months of fear leading up to that I didn't have to live with. And so in the book of the 5 regrets of the dearly departed, it talks about that. But unfortunately, one of two things happen when we have fear inside of our comfort zone about coming out, or the pain of once we do come out. So 2 things happen. One, we're back to this word of cognitive dissonance. The feeling of discomfort is now seeking comfort in the form of immediate gratification by justifying return to old habits. What I do a lot of times when it comes to change is I talk about the grieving process. Now, who would have thought? Becoming a leader, you need to know about the grieving process. But what happens in this space when you're trying to change yourself or a culture is you hit this space of what's called bargaining. Before I get to bargaining, let me tell you about something else. When you're dealing with a team or you're dealing with yourself, the first response that when you tell yourself or someone else that change is going to happen, you get pushback. You get anger. You get a mask, like denial. The first stage of the grieving process. It's processing, denial, and thinking that you can do something when you really can't. So it goes that way too. Until you get to the gym and the truth comes out and you get angry at yourself. So what happens is you really get a denial at first. Like, I can do this. The emotion that I'm feeling can sustain me. And then the emotion goes away and then anger comes. Now you tell a team or you tell a culture, you tell yourself change is going to, someone else tells you change is going to happen, anger is going to show up. Anger will show up in one form or another. And as we cross this, anger comes out differently for all of us. A lot of different emotions will come up. But once we get past the anger stage and we start now getting to that internal dialogue, that bargaining of the grieving process, this is where we talk ourselves into, and here's it down here, and you have this, you get into this bargaining, that self-justification. A big part of cognitive dissonance is that bargaining. Like, I don't need to do this. This is stupid. It doesn't make sense. The numbers don't align. Right? This doesn't feel good. So emotion comes up, and then the prefrontal cortex assigns a story. Now, I'm not going to go into like how the brain is working at this time, but there's a biological process happening. So, one of two things happen. One, we push through to the point of acceptance, the threshold of creativity, or we go right back. We find a way to go right back to our comfort zone. In here are just different things that can trigger change. This circle again represents comfort zone. So change, a challenge, intimate relationships. You guys, remember that? A lot of times when it comes to addiction, people who are trying to become clean, and this happens for all of us, just not on as intense scale. Intimate relationships can bring up past pain just as much as a pain point can. So the feeling of joy and love can draw that out. I don't need to talk to you about postpartum depression, that love, that release, and then all of a sudden, weeks, months down the road, the opposite, something else comes up. Foreign element, an unexpected external event from your environment. Unmet expectations, foreboding, like expecting the worst. And a crisis. So some of these things can be a choice, but other things sometimes will just happen. So these are all the things. And this is essentially what's happening. Again, I don't want to do a data dump, but this is the 50,000 foot view of what's going on in terms of our comfort zone, and the second we cross the threshold of change, we are vulnerable. And vulnerability can be very destructive. I'm going to show you how to change that, but why it's good. So I also put these handouts, I believe, I hope I did, in, maybe I didn't, no I didn't. I didn't, but I have this for you. So if you want to reach out to me, I'd love to send this to you. So I talked about anger. They're related emotions. So sometimes it can just be a feeling of annoyed, enraged, frustrated, irate, irritated, mad, and then some signs and behaviors. I'm going to go through these really quick, but we all can feel, these are all feelings that we can experience when we cross that comfort zone, that threshold. Anxiety, once you come out of your comfort zone. Related emotions, dread, fear, jittery, scared, stressed, timid, uneasy. One of the things that I help people identify when we're working through this, whether it's in class or one-on-one, is bringing these emotions in what I call captivity. So you make contact with them by getting outside of your comfort zone, and then you bring them into captivity. You bring them back into the understanding of being a part. A lot of times, people who have destructive behaviors see themselves as the part. They see these parts as the whole. And they have sentences and life sentences in their mind that say, it's always like this. And they start to feel helpless and hopeless. And even worse, worthless. And this doesn't have to be the way they see themselves in life. It could be in a particular area of life. One of the biggest frustrations I have when it comes to helping people with their business is when they price their product or service. They really put a number on their worth because they're projecting now onto a product. There was this lady I loved to death. She was so vulnerable, such a great person, and she was making these candles and soaps, and they were so beautiful. And then she brought them into the class and showed everybody, and she told us the price that she was charging for them. Now, to kind of give you some contrast, are you all familiar with Yankee Candle? So you go to a store and you buy a Yankee Candle for like 15 bucks. They're expensive. Or a smaller one for like 10. These were better than what she was making. And she was only charging $3. And she was such a good person, but yet she was dealing with something else. And when she came out of her comfort zone and she showed her worth, it was revealed in her product. But how many times do we do that when we go to negotiate for salaries? Or stand up for what we believe? We don't think we're worthy of that. I'm not saying all of us, but there are those who present ideas that don't think are valuable, but yet could really, really make a difference. We all have that on some level. So vulnerability, contact with sadness, cross your threshold, your vulnerability threshold. Sadness could be an experience we have. Related emotions could be depression, despair, disappointment, emptiness, grief, guilt, hopelessness, shame, loneliness, signs and behaviors, crying, fatigue, inactivity. You can really hit the wall sometimes when it comes to sadness. Jealousy. Related emotions, bitterness, contempt, envy, spite. I would add to that resentfulness, the inability to forgive. There's also the other end of the spectrum. We talked about emotions when it comes to relationships. Affection, attachment, closeness. They can really offset our balance. I know you were saying earlier, balance. Whether it's what we do at work and what we do at home, there could be emotional balances that throw us off as well that need to be regulated through emotional intelligence. Vulnerability, contact with happiness. So these are all areas that we can explore when it comes to crossing the threshold. So what do we do now once we have this emotion? It doesn't look too promising. Here we are vulnerable, and now we're susceptible to all these issues. But why is this so important? There's an anchor. Because really, this is where change happens. If you notice over time when we live in our comfort zone, it's like getting in a shower. Now you get in the shower on a cool day, on a cold day, and it's nice and warm, and you're like, oh, that feels good. You're in the spa, and you say, oh, it feels good. But eventually you have to get out, or you get used to that temperature. Our comfort zones are essentially the same way. They're slowly closing in on us, trying to push us out. And what's happening is if we don't let go of our comfort zone, sooner or later we're going to live with tunnel vision. All of you who mentioned experiencing people who are just unaware at work, this is the problem in life. Because we're looking for certainty, and we're holding on to our comfort zones, our routines, and slowly losing our vision, the ability to see how we can connect with others, to understand others. That's the unawareness that a few of you talked about earlier. So we're going to have to come out of these, or we'll be pushed out of these. They call it a midlife crisis. You ever heard that term, midlife crisis? I have as a guy. And they say that what's happening is we're holding on to our beliefs from our youth, our younger years, and eventually we're looking for meaning for the very first time in our lives. This is the natural progression. Now, obviously, people find it in different ways, earlier, later, but it's just an example of the natural progression of needing to grow. So it happens, again, voluntarily, or it's going to happen progressively. So again, now how do we take vulnerability and make it a strength? Now, vulnerability in and of itself can be very revealing and destructive. So how do we change? How do we anchor it? How do we stop this? It starts with values. Values, again, are really the driving force under all people's experience. The comfort zone that we have are the direct experiences. But like I said earlier, when I say family, which we can all agree is a value, I guarantee you didn't think of my family, you thought of yours. So in your handout, what I've shown you, what I've given you, is a worksheet. I use this actually in my financial literacy class to show people where their money is going. how they're spending their time and their money, but this is adaptable to anywhere in life. So what motivates people? How can you negotiate that with them? Once you get to a space of being vulnerable, leading with vulnerability, how do you pace yourself and lead yourself or others? You tap into values. And so, how are we doing on time? Okay, so real quick, I'm going to show you how this works. You have this chart. Look on your chart. You all have pens, right? Look across this chart and very quickly, within the next 2 to 3 minutes, circle the top 10 that apply to you. Think about them for a second. Figure out which ones are the top 10 for you. So we can kind of just pause right there for the sake of time, but this again is something that you can take and use over and over again. You can even use it with a team to really find out, with a simple exercise to find out what is the driving, motivational force here. So all of you have a top 10. Now look at the list, whether it's 10 or you just were able to choose 5, and bring that down to half. If you found 10, what is the top 4? So look at your list real quick. If it's 10, what are the top 4? Okay, so again, for the sake of time, really quick, share your top 4, or your top 1, or whatever you came up with.
Well, I did 4.
Okay.
I did self-respect, resilience, balance, and spirituality.
Okay. Good.
Religion, love, wisdom, kindness.
Okay.
Spirituality, love, faith, and friendship.
Independence, joy, courage, kindness.
Equality, respect, friendship, and fairness.
Patience, family, balance, respect.
Joy, kindness, compassion, and cooperation.
So when we hear all these words, now there's some overlap with a few of you chose the same word. But if we take every one of these words and we look at the behavior that follows this, we can agree that we find these values all to be important. But the behaviors can sometimes be very, very different. And so when we are evaluating our behavior and other people's behavior, we can speak from the perspective of value. But at the same time, and more importantly, if we can see destructive behavior still as a justification based on that value, we can be open to understanding. So let me give you an example. If I could use the addiction of smoking.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, intellectually, we would all say that, okay, if I look at the habit of smoking, we know, we have the facts, we have the data that this is destructive behavior. But nobody makes a decision to do something in the beginning saying, I'm going to do this, this is destructive. I mean, those are very small cases, I'm sure there's those things. But what's justifying the behavior is a desire to feel good. I'm sure that if we were able to examine all of our lives, we can look at behavior at some point of our life. I'm going to talk about vision in a second, but here, just say that this is a timeline. Here's our birth. As we kind of grow older, here we are today. If we could look back in our life and look at certain areas, the choices that we make, there's something in our life where we would say, I shouldn't have done that, I knew better. I'm sure we could all say that, I knew better, whether it's at 12, 20, 30, 40, etc., wherever we're at, there's a point. So let's go back there to that point. We walk back there in all the wisdom that we are today. And say, for example, there was a choice to do something where we go, we knew better. But earlier I talked about tunnel vision. And say, for example, if we could go back to high school, desire just to fit in or do well or succeed. There's nothing wrong with those things. But that tunnel vision, when we're so focused on the desire to do something or be something, and we're focused, now if I could just use this is exactly what happens. So look at that picture on the wall. I'm just going to use this in a moment. This word create. And rather than saying create, put one of your words up here that you have circled. Family, faith, respect. And so, for example, we're standing here, and I'm looking at it, and you're standing here with me, looking at create, or family, or respect. And as it's like, I just want to create. I just want to do things for my family. I just want to be respected. I just want to cooperate. I just want to insert your word. And it's like, I just want to do that. Because that is what makes me feel good. That's what makes me feel fulfilled. That makes me feel connected. And as we stare at it and we obsess on it, now this is happening in our mind. As we continue to obsess on it, vision starts to go. We get this because we feel disconnected from it. We're outside of our comfort zone. And then we get this tunnel vision. And an exercise I used to do with youth is we get this tunnel vision as they justify destructive behaviors. As I tell them, I'm usually facilitating, or this is what's going on in mine. Now keep focusing on it, and you walk towards it, and it's getting closer, and they get closer and closer, and the tunnel vision gets tighter and tighter. And what we saw back here, why we shouldn't do these things, is no longer there, and we continue to move forward. And we get there, and we're able to reach out and touch it, whether it's create, family, belonging. I tell them to take off the tunnel vision, and you look back, and what I have done along the way is put down symbols of relationships, responsibilities, spirituality. And what we have done while we were so hyper-focused on just fitting in or creating your family is we stepped all over those things. We compromised. And we looked back on that timeline again and we go, wow, I knew better. We knew better. But because we were hyper-focused and we had tunnel vision, we stepped over so many different things. And the outcome, we wish would have been different. It's different here. It started for one reason, continued for another, but in the process, we did so much wrong. So values, whatever's on the wall, whatever's out in front of you, can justify a lot of destructive behavior. It can do a lot of good too. Pace and lead. And we can even be vulnerable when we're anchored to values. Because when we're vulnerable, if you remember that grieving process, denial first, anger, bargaining. When we don't know what we value, we'll talk ourselves into doing anything. That means going right back to old habits. The smoking example. I know I should quit. I never smoked. I don't know the battle. But I know what goes on up here. Because we're unaware, we don't see the other things that we value, the other things that we step over along the way. Because we don't know this. Without values, we can't be vulnerable for good. Now there's another page. To this. You can answer it on your own time. It goes a little bit deeper. And again, you could use this with clients. You could use this with your team. You could use this with family. Or you could use it with yourself later. Again, these are simple things that can slow you down just enough to get back to that pause. Just to stop. Your second page looks like this. It's the next one over. So now I want to talk a little bit about vision, the one that I shared earlier with you that really is my pet peeve. So when it comes to vision, this is the simplistic diagram. And I know, again, I'm getting to that point of a data dump, and I'm probably blowing through your break. But we're gonna press through because we're getting close on time. But again, cherry pick this information. If you start to fall asleep, please. I've seen many people fall asleep, but still listen. I just want to share this with you, kind of brush across it. But this is really what emotional intelligence is, and a part of it is understanding vision. Now, what I just shared with you, that timeline, is a big part of this. Because again, when we look at a timeline of our life, and if I could use this imaginary starting point again, here being the beginning of our life, and then this point being where we are today, and then I kind of hit a wall here. Hopefully we have more space to kind of go forward in life. I don't want to hit a wall just so soon, but an indefinite line moving forward. So just kind of keep this imaginary timeline in life. When it comes to our beliefs, now back to my little cheesy circle, our beliefs, our comfort zone. What's happening literally is we are taking hindsight, in other words, past experiences, and creating foresight, which is our expectations. Completely leaping over insight and oversight. And I'm going to break this down a little bit more. So this red spot right here represents our comfort zone. It's that space in our timeline where we're at today. And let me say this. There's nothing wrong with our comfort zone. In fact, it's needed. It's needed. Because when we're stretched, we need to come home too. We need to have those spaces where we do feel safe. But we're speaking from the perspective of growth, change. So just because I've bashed comfort zones, I also want to say that they're so important to have those spaces. For example, driving over here today, I love my car. I do. I love it. I love driving. It focuses me. I think. My car's got all the bells and whistles. It's nice. I love it. And when I'm with my friends and I'm just by myself, I like all kinds of music. I usually turn it up, get my adrenaline going, and do that type of stuff. But coming over here today, I had to have different music on. You know, I was playing softer music. You need to chill out. You're not cruising down 17 going to Santa Cruz with the window open and getting in that space. You're trying to get in a different space. So there's nothing wrong with comfort zones and creating that. In fact, I want you to honor your comfort zone. I want you to value it. And that's what we'll talk about insight a little bit about. So our beliefs really rely on hindsight. It looks at our past and says, well, because I experienced X, Y, and Z at this place with this person, I can expect foresight, a particular outcome, or experience, or a feeling of certainty. And so that is where judgment comes from. You can be very judgmental. It's based on a feeling. Based on my experience, this experience, X, Y, or Z, was either good or bad. It made me feel good. It made me feel bad. So therefore I can expect. We generalize. I'll share with you in a minute what some of the filters we use in our generalization process. So 4D vision is not only understanding our hindsight, our experience, and how it creates our expectation, but it's also insight. So for example, if we are here today, gaining an understanding in hindsight, I'm kind of going in reverse, but I think you can track me. Understanding our past, that's why psychologists and therapists, they always ask you, well, tell me about your mother. Tell me about your father. Because traditionally there is a lot of information there. There's a lot of information that will tell you about your perception of life now, what you're expecting, and drawing into your comfort zone. We are really attracted to, whether it's good, bad, or indifferent, what we're familiar with. We are really attracted to it. So as we look back, there's insights that we can gain, there's understanding that we can gain based on our experience. Here's where it gets really cool with insight. It's a sliding perspective. So your insight right now, looking back, you can pretty much have that classic 20/20 vision. But can you do this? The example we just gave a few minutes ago about looking back at your younger you, but walking back there and understanding the decision process then is different than understanding it from this perspective. Because we can look back and we go, yep, that experience in my teens, or whatever I did at that particular age, that was bad, not good, shouldn't have done that. That's one way of doing it. But insight is that ability not only to be present, but to go back at any other point in your life and go, wow, I made that bad decision with great intentions. Because I just wanted to fit in, or I just wanted to be happy, or I just wanted to do it for my family, to have a sense of belonging. That's compassion for yourself. And if you're going to have it for others, I think you were sharing compassion at work a little bit more earlier. That's how it's developed, is with yourself first. Because again, we can put ourselves in bad situations for good intentions. And when we understand those intentions, we can not only change, but have more compassion for ourselves. And the second you do that, your confidence, your sense of self-worth goes up, trends up exponentially. And then you can share that with others. You can see the value in others where they previously didn't see it. And they feel safe around you as a leader. I keep looking at you. You just had a great example. I just keep looking at you.
Oh, that's good.
And so that's insight. It's really a sliding perspective across your timeline. And I love sitting with clients in this area to really figure out why that lady couldn't price her product effectively. Why only $3? What's going on? Gain insight. Oversight. This one's a sliding focused perspective where you can really dive down. But this one's fun. Because now you're in that position to see everything. I love chess. Any of you guys play chess? I love chess. I love not only playing it, but watching it. Because when I'm watching chess, I know that this player and this player have their strategy. And I get to watch what they're doing. But then I can look down and I see different strategies. Ones that they don't see. And when I'm playing, I know the one watching can see it. And I hate it when someone says, well, why didn't you do this? I hate that, right? Because I remember what it's like to be here and there, but the observer oftentimes doesn't. Anyway, my point being is when you have oversight, you're able to see multiple strategies. And again, I could sit on this for days and unpack it with individuals in a room. But really the ability to see things in life from multiple perspectives is again a starting point where you're able to be vulnerable, develop empathy, and compassion for others. And as a leader, and the capacity to change as an individual, these competencies are needed. And again, I know you've heard this before, but it's back to that simplistic wisdom that really helped.
Can I share something?
Yes, please.
It has to do with insight, because a lot of times we look back at those decisions that we made a long time ago and feel like, oh, I shouldn't have done that.
Mm-hmm.
But, and it's easy to beat yourself up about it. It was something that was really bad.
Mm-hmm.
But a friend of mine says, that we make the best decision we can with the information we have available at the time. So right now, we would probably have made a different decision.
Mhm.
That's our, hindsight. But the insight from that is realizing that at the time and place where we were when we made that decision, it seemed like a good idea or the best of intentions or whatever. So we can't really beat ourselves up for that because we did what we thought was the right thing at that moment.
Exactly. It sounds like Maya Angelou. She had a similar quote. I don't know particularly what when I first heard that concept. Is we did the best we can, similar to what you're saying, at that time, and when we knew better, we did better. Yeah. So that's a great point. And it is so true.
Is it easy to do so?
It's practice. Yeah, you have to learn to be able to believe yourself when you say that. I mean, you can't just be like, oh, well, I made the decision and I could at the time. Like you have to do the insight part. You have to look back and think about what the context was when you made that decision and why, and then understand that you may have had the best of intentions or you may have thought you were doing the right thing at that time. But now, with perspective, you realize that that wasn't the best thing, but you made that decision based on some kind of rationale that made sense at the time.
Yeah, and what's sad to add to that is people who don't take that approach, what was once guilt, like, oh, I feel guilty, I should have done better, should have been more responsible, more resourceful, asked for help, whatever it may be, that unresolved, it could develop into shame. So rather than it being, I didn't do good, or I didn't do right, it becomes, I'm not right. And that's the progression that can be very dangerous if it's not addressed. And so then people will quickly, have that tunnel vision. So that's a great point. Thank you for sharing that.
It goes back to the very first vulnerability in the mask.
Mm-hmm.
Why did you put on your mask? Because your boss had on his mask. And no one's willing to take the mask off.
Yeah.
So the first person that takes off their mask is usually the one that wins.
Oh yeah, vulnerability is power. I not only do workshops like this, but I do testimonials, like of my own life. I just focus on my life and speak about it as a guide. Like, this is where I learned this. And some of the most impactful moments in my life is sharing my personal life journey. And not only the vulnerability of that, but the vulnerability I receive from others. You talk about being the first. It is such an amazing pace and leading tool that when you say, where you're weak, in business you do SWOT analysis. You guys ever heard of that? You do strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats. But it's really in that weaknesses that you gain trust. When you're vulnerable, others take their masks off. And there was a point where I was speaking, and it was the Koinonia group. I was speaking to a room. I think I was at the time 40. I'm 46 now. I was speaking to a group of people who I think it's 65 and older. So I'm 40. They're all 65 and older. 200 people, and I'm sharing my life story. And I'll never forget this moment. I was speaking for like 45 minutes. I got off the stage, and the guy who invited me gave me a big hug, and we were standing there just like this, looking back up at the guy who was running it. And I don't know the guy's name. I just remember this moment. And he was an older gentleman, had to be like 75 years old, but he had a flat top and shorter than yours, kind of like yours, but very, very much shorter. Still looked like he was in the military. Still looked like he'd take me at 75 years old. But he gets up there and he puts his hands on the podium. They didn't know what I was going to come and speak about. And he looked at me. And of course he had this stern face, and just like, he looked at me and goes, I didn't expect that, son. And I was just like, okay, all right. Okay, all right. But then he looked up and he says, when you were speaking, I thought of a moment when I was a child. He's a 75-year-old man. Very strong, very stern face. He said, I remember a moment with my mother. And we were in the garden picking roses. And that's as far as he got. And he broke down. And you could feel it. As the leader of this group, it was almost like the first time that he was able just to be vulnerable. I will never forget. It still gives me chills. I feel it going through my head right now. If I had hair on my head, I'd be standing up. Looking up and feeling that. And it's in that moment he was able to let go. But it also showed me that that wasn't the only environment that could happen. It can happen in families. Not only on an individual level, but on families. It can happen on teams. It can happen in communities. The first time I spoke, had to be, we're going on 30 years now, 25, 30 years ago. It was an environment where it was like a Toastmasters environment. It took me almost a year to get up and speak. But when I did, I don't remember what I said, right? But when I got done and I got to my car, I cried. Because it wasn't what I said or what was accomplished, it was the fact that I was able to release it. And that's what vulnerability does. It's a release. Did you have your...
I was just, was that Jim by any chance?
I just remember the moment. I just remember the moment. I don't remember who it was, but that name sounds familiar.
My life, very difficult to accept that fact that I intentionally be vulnerable. I mean, look at my life. You look at all of these leaderships, they come on the TV, they talk. Nobody ever will show you the vulnerability. And that's what I carry as vulnerability. I don't want to be vulnerable. So why go in that, and that's me speaking, why I do not want to put myself in that situation. That everybody around me, hey, this is how perhaps I'm certain 100% I'm right. I'm saying, yes, 100% I don't want to show. There you go. Even though I may be not 100% certain, I don't want to show it. And that's a difficult concept for me to grasp at this time.
So like, real quick, right, because I know that this is going to open everybody up. I'm going to show you. Literally, we're going to get there. We got two more, voice and validation.
Can I just say
Yeah,
quick
absolutely.
thing? I think it has to do with framing.
With
There's
what?
a lot
Has to do with-
framing
Framing.
of the word vulnerability, because I think societally, we have been taught that vulnerability equals weakness.
Yes.
But if you can reframe how people look at that word in a positive way, it's really being open. Like, it's, instead of being set that this is the way, you're able to be open to say, oh, there's all these possibilities. And so if you reframe it to not look at it as a weakness, but look at it as like a strength of diverse possibilities, then it might be easier to see why being vulnerable can be good.
Well, that's why we
Because
use it.
if you say, this is the way, I know it is, I'm pretending that, I'm
Comfort
gonna
zone.
fake it till I make it,
Yeah.
you're shutting out all these possibilities that might be like the best one.
Yeah.
Even though, because you've married yourself to saying, oh, I'm not gonna be weak, I'm gonna stick to my point. But you may be excluding all these other points.
And it
that
gets
could be
narrower,
better.
right? It's more
Yeah.
constricting the more you hold to that.
Yeah.
And that's after vulnerability, we talk about values, because you ask what's it for. Vulnerability can be very uncomfortable and very destructive because we get desperate to hold on to like our sense of security, authority, whatever we label as life. Right now we're getting down to needs. I'm not going to dive into neurological levels and really what's going on. I did that last time and I got this glaze over looking at everybody. So, but there's a lot going on neurologically that's happening, but that's why I'm sharing the values component. You ask, what is vulnerability for? Vulnerability is the soil where all values grow. It really is. Or it could be the soil where destruction grows. Because if we see vulnerability as a threat, then we stay in our comfort zone and everything just that validates that. It's not just dad saying it, but here's this like wisdom that has been passed down through generation. Again, the simplicity. The simplicity.
Can you take off your mask and not know you did?
Can you take it off and not know?
Like, I was gonna ask you, have you ever mentored anybody in your career? Yeah, so, probably you took off your mask and didn't know it in those conversations, right? Because internally, you're like going, you're being vulnerable, but the person you're mentoring doesn't know you're being vulnerable. Because you're seeing in them what you see in yourself, right? And you pass on that wisdom, kind of lifting them up, right? And I think you take off your mask and you do it with your kids, right? You know, with your children, you're like, okay, they don't know I'm being vulnerable right now.
Yeah. I often say, I love who I am when I'm with my daughter. Because I'm vulnerable. She's 4. and she'll wake up in the middle of the night and just say, "Daddy, give me apple juice," half asleep. She gets thirsty. And I love springing out of bed at 2 a.m. in the morning and getting her that apple juice. Now I'm spoiling her. Save the parenting criticism. Keep it off the page there. Right? I love spoiling her. I just love her to death. But when she's not there and my alarm goes off at 6:30, I'm hitting the snooze button. I'm not springing out of bed. Right? So, absolutely, it's like it can come off depending on the environment. And again, perfect timing, voice. It's going to explain what's happening there. So when I'm speaking about voice now, what I'm referring to is what we hear. Now, not only what we're hearing today, but what have we heard over a lifetime? What we think and what we say. And why this is so important. Why it's the tongue or the words that we use that what give life. Because again, they're what justify what we value. So here, the voice of vulnerability. I hope you have this in your notes. I don't think you do. Let me take a quick look. But I want to quickly just kind of go through this, because when it comes to vulnerability, we have, someone mentioned it earlier, filters or frameworks. One of my all-time favorite books when it comes to communicating and how we hear, is you can look it up here or look it up online, is called Sleight of Mouth. It's by Robert Dilts. Robert Dilts is you guys ever heard of NLP, Neuro-Linguistic Programming? Okay, so he was one of the originators of NLP, and it's really best practices. NLP is best practices of behavioral psychology. And they put it together in what's called Neuro-Linguistic Programming. I read his book about sleight of mouth, and it's phenomenal in terms of filters and how to communicate and negotiate. And so one of the things when it comes to filters, as we come out of our comfort zone or our inability to let go, is what's called cognitive distortions. Now this is a real term. I didn't make this up. And some of the cognitive distortions that we have is the way that we talk to ourselves, the way that we see things, the way we judge things, and the way that we kind of see the world. And one thing, so I'm going to go through them really quickly. We're getting short on time. But again, think of from the perspective of, here's my circle, my favorite circle of comfort zones. And then cognitive dissonance, familiar words, change, challenge, crisis. These are the things that may draw you out. But this is what's going on internally. So you talked about that internal dialogue that we have. So some of the things that are happening is filtering. Filtering, for example, is that we will cherry pick what people say and either construct what we want or deconstruct what they're saying to still continue to fit what is comfortable for us. Polarized thinking. An example of this is black or white thinking. Like it's either right or it's wrong. There's no gray area. We all know these people. I think, Drew, you were kind of alluding to that. Now, I'm not saying that's what you were saying, but it sounded like that's what you were saying, is that you have that engineer mindset that says it's either 1 or 0. That's it. And that formula either works or it doesn't work. So polarized thinking can kind of represent that. It's like someone's either doing something right or they're doing it wrong. And if they're doing it right or they're doing it wrong, depending on their communication style, if they're aggressive, they're going to let you know. If they're passive, they'll say it's fine, but then they'll get you later. Or they'll just be that person who never says anything. Overgeneralizing. This is a big judgment. Right? If I said overgeneralizing, I see that there's 2 people wearing salmon-colored shirts today. People who wear salmon-colored shirts are the type of people who come to emotional intelligence classes. That's it. Overgeneralizing. Jumping to conclusions. This is where our expectations really haunt us. And this is where actually people who suffer from PTSD, think about diversity and inclusion in the workplace nowadays. A lot of military are being welcomed in, but also with that, a big issue in a larger work environment, people who struggle with PTSD. Mental health is a big issue right now. oftentimes jumping to conclusion is what they're experiencing. Again, I'm not here to say that any of these things are right or wrong, but they're things to be aware of in people's communication styles and the way that we, hear information. So if we're jumping to conclusions, like for example, if I walk over here and I see a piece of string on the floor, and I go, "That's a spider! It's a spider!" And I'm not even going to look back, and I leave the room, leave the building, leave San Jose, never come back. Right? There was a spider in the 3rd floor of the San Jose Public Library. That's it. Done with them. And it was just a piece of string. That's kind of ridiculous, but get the feeling. Emotional reasoning. Now, emotional reasoning happens a lot when it comes to grieving. And that's like what I was saying earlier. When people are going through emotional experiences, that what happens is they feel something. And regardless of facts, based on the feeling, it's reasoned out emotionally. Sometimes people who can be super reasonable will feel something and then say, well, what's happening here is X, Y, Z, and then they really guard themselves emotionally by being super reasonable. So emotional reasoning and super reasoning are synonymous. Personalizing. It all has to do with me. Oh, the stock market's going down. What the heck did I do? Or I'm going to a baseball game tonight, and every time I bring my rabbit's foot, they win. So personalizing everything. Control fallacies. Oh, they'll change. Right? Well, if I do this, then they'll change. Right? They influence everything. It's similar to personalizing. Blaming. I backed into that car coming in, but they were too far out. They shouldn't have been parked so far out, right? Not my fault. They did it. Never mind, I was coming around the corner at 20 miles an hour in a 5-mile-an-hour zone. Okay, shoulds, also musts. You should have did this. I must do that. Should have been this way. Again, these are all filters that help us kind of justify going back or staying in our controlled environments, how we talk to ourselves. Fallacy of change. The fallacy of change is also similar to control fallacies. Okay? Always right and always reasonable. And global thinking. Global thinking is also black and white thinking. Again, it's back to this, everybody who wears Santa Claus t-shirts, they all go to emotional intelligence classes. Or everybody you think of.
This was coral.
Is it really? What are you talking about? I'm not a fashionista.
That's what she told me when she said it was coral. I was like, all right. I wouldn't have.
So global labeling, it's a lot of issues we have now with politics and religion and stuff that you see in the news, global labeling. Very, very sad. But again, it's all this process to stay in our own comfort zone when we filter these things.
Well, can I also say something about the personalized?
Personalizing? Yeah.
Yeah, because I think that this happens also right now, like with my mom. I'm trying to help her because she watches my son a lot. Or she's one of the main caretakers of him when I have to work and stuff. But when I'm trying to help her with the positive parenting strategies I'm learning, because I'm learning them too, so I'm having to change my behavior as well. But when I tell her about them or try to give her constructive criticism, she takes it personal. So is that the same, does that fall under that category where she's like, why are you attacking me? Why are you telling me I'm this bad mother? And I'm like, I'm not. I'm just saying this is what I learned from the behavioral specialist, and would that fall under the same?
Possibly. I mean, what your words are saying sounds like it. I wouldn't want to label her behavior, right?
Mm-hmm.
But my objective would be this, exactly what I kind of have here, is that when we encounter some of these filters, right? Because whether you're on a team or you're dealing with yourself, or you're learning to market, right? Market is the way that we get beyond these filters. Again, here comes the simplicity of things. And you go, are you kidding me? This is a solution? Yes. Listen for the value in the conversation and reflect on the value proposition. Huge amount of data out there when it comes to business about what people are valuing right now. And this ebbs and flows with seasons in life. But when you're doing it with an individual, or even reflecting upon yourself, we have the values that we talked about earlier. Get beyond the word. Can you find what these people are valuing? Can you find out what you're valuing? If you keep doing something over and over again, you go, why do I keep doing that? Why do I keep changing lanes without signaling and then shooting across multiple lanes and putting everyone in danger? Or why is that guy or gal doing that? You know, what is the value that's motivating? Again, destructive behavior really boils down to universal values. But you can listen. Listen to yourself, have that conversation. Here's that word I used earlier, pause. Just stop. Our thoughts, our habits are moving so fast. You know, they say we're only capable of housing 7 bits of information consciously, whereas the rest is below, subconsciously. And there's actually, this is very interesting. I just kind of read this my last year doing research, is that it has been measured that people are only capable, back to this number 7 again, of making 7 major choices a day. The emotional capacity to make 7 healthy choices a day. It's why CEOs wear the same thing every day, because they don't want that emotional energy to be depleted in figuring out what they're going to wear. So preserving emotional energy to make more decisions or more effective decisions is really limited. And so if we can just pause and see what's going on, if we can just get some space, give it some time, suspend judgment, be slow to speak, if we can just stop doing that. And I'm being joking, I'm being flippant about this, but there's a lot of ways of doing this. There's yoga, there's meditation, there's different practices that we can do to really slow down. Again, I use the cheesy example of, or exercise of time management, writing it out. That really helps us slow down. So pause. These are, again, dealing with filters. More importantly, ask questions. Getting more information can help clear up misunderstandings, focus on facts and values, and validate emotions. A lot of times when people are just in a rhythm, they're constantly looking for just validation. So getting people to stop and change often begins first with listening, slowing down and listening to see what their habits are, pausing our own thinking, and then asking a question. A lot of times people ask me questions in the workshops, and it's just off the top of their head. And I have to stop when I'm hearing questions, because I can just come out with the material. But usually sometimes either was in a workshop or talking to somebody else, and I ask them, well, what do you mean? Go a little bit deeper. You can discover a lot more information. Sometimes that first comment, criticism, or response is just a thin defense layer. You can get a lot of insight just asking, I don't understand, can you tell me more? So here's the other piece. Now, Michael, you mentioned this earlier, you were giving advice when it comes to voice, the process of growth, and how we process information. I talk about coaching and mentorship, or coaching and community, because when it comes to voice, our environment, our network is so pivotal. You know, one of the really cool thing I heard the other day on LinkedIn was this consultant talking about our online network and how important it was to go through your different platforms, whether it's Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, whatever you use, and really curate it towards people who share similar values. And I was guilty. I was thinking of my LinkedIn profile, I just kind of generally like connect, and then I'll send a generic response, hey, thanks for connecting, if there's anything you need, let me know. But what she was suggesting, like if they're not in your industry, we're talking about LinkedIn, weed them out, because if once you share something and you have this undefined network, nobody hears it. It doesn't get to many people. But if it's specific, more people will hear it. And the same thing is true not in LinkedIn, but other platforms, but also in our lives. If you want to reinforce values, Look at your network. And I have this coaching and mentorship, and really this is a I don't know these people, to be honest. I could say, yeah, these are friends, but they're not. I don't know, I just picked it off. But really this is a representation of, if you're this person, guy or gal, who's pouring into your life? And who are you pouring your life into? This is so pivotal in terms of reinforcing values and understanding and being accountable for how we're living. And so here you have this more intimate, this is probably a dad, son, grandson. Here you have a micro example, but what about community at whole? Who are your close friends? You know, is it really all about work and home? Do you have a network outside of that? What are your hobbies? And do you have a network around you? So important. I was going to call this vetting, but I thought it was a good example of who's pouring into your life and who are you pouring your life into. These networks are huge. So examine your network. Now here we get to the validation piece. Now the previous 4 V's are again great for conceptualizing, reflecting on, being up in that space of what to examine. But validation, the validation piece, is now what do I do? What do I do? I have all these great ideas. I know what I should be doing. I know what I want to do. I know what I am doing. I heard this information, Brian, what do I do now? So when people come into Renaissance or they call me up and they ask me, what do I do with this business idea? Here it is. Corner office, CEO of Shoes of the World, whatever it may be. I always ask them the same question. What does your business, I thought I was going to have this here, but it didn't happen. I always ask them, what does your business look like this weekend? I know where you want to be. I know what you want to change, but what does it look like this weekend? Thinking small. So the quotes I have up here, experience is the hardest kind of teacher. It gives you the test first and the lesson afterwards. I think you spoke to that earlier in terms of the failure component. In my book, Fail and Grow Rich, we really are then forced to be vulnerable again. In this validation piece, we're forced to be vulnerable again. But now you anchor that vulnerability with values. And you have a wider perspective in terms of vision, rather than the tunnel vision. And you have the right people and resources in your life. When we're vulnerable, and we're not seeing clearly, and we're not anchored to values, we're very destructive. Vulnerability can be very scary, and we can feel like we're alone. If you're feeling alone, chances are you're not anchored to values. You don't have the right voices up here. And you're not doing the right thing. So here's what we do to validate our creativity and inner resources. Here's the big question. What does it look like this weekend? Baby steps. And what is this a picture of?
Oh, yeah.
The moon landing. What's the famous narrative that came with the moon landing? Yeah,
Smallest thing.
one small step. One small step.
Giant step for me.
Thank you. Oftentimes it's not that first step that makes all the difference, but it's what you are stepping out of, what you're releasing. What does it look like to forgive somebody? What does it look like to start a business? What does it look like to change your diet? What does it look like to go from this to this in the beginning? What does it look like? It looks like a small step. 3 steps to stepping into vulnerability intelligently. 1, think small. What does your idea look like this weekend? 2, think value. We're just doing this again. Practice gratitude and value recognition. 3, forgive. Here's the head fake now. And I say this in all my business classes. If I can sum up business in one word, and people shake their head, really? Entrepreneurship is about forgiveness. It's about forgiving. Giving before expecting. Forgive. Beliefs are giving because they expect it. That's where we start to get in this narrow tunnel vision. And so there's two principles here that I'm going to leave you with. Life is about gratitude. Gratitude about what we value. You have that inventory and that practice with you. And it's about forgiveness. It's about initiating action and letting go of expectations. Because the way things have always been don't have to be the way that they'll always be. So gratitude and forgiveness. And that's Vx5 Emotional Intelligence. I want to thank you all for coming. I know this is a lot of information, but like I said, I just wanted to give you a 50,000-foot view of what this process is like. Hopefully you're able to cherry pick some ideas. I think I've given you some takeaways in your hand. My contact information is there. I'd love to have you all reach out to me. I know most of you. So please do so. And what this is a challenge, what challenge this is for you, is for most people who come to these, they show up, they experience it, and they get back right in their rhythm. The challenge to you is not necessarily maybe practicing any one of these, but reaching out to me. Follow-up is so huge. And if I can expand on any areas in your life or your situation, I would be more than happy to do so. So you have my phone number, text me, call me. You have my email. Shoot me a letter. I love to chat with you. We have this room, I think, until 12:30. So I'll hang out here until about then. But Kevin, I want to thank you for filming today. I want to thank all of you for giving up your Saturdays and your Saturday morning and hanging out with me. Fill out, last assignment, if you have any feedback or final thoughts on the journal that I gave you, the Insight Journal, please, I would love to hear. Now is your opportunity to tell me to stop talking so much, or add this, or share something. I'd love to hear it. But are there any questions or any insights?
Can you repeat again the definition of emotional reasoning? Because all my life, I always think about you do things with reason or with emotion, and then you're saying emotional reasoning.
Yeah, so the limbic system, that's where emotion comes from, emotional memory. Can I geek out now for a little bit? Okay, so we have the prefrontal cortex. That's where a lot of conscious behavior comes from. What happens is there's a system here. There's a system here, and emotion will come up. Like think of being hungry. Say, for example, you didn't have breakfast this morning. And all of a sudden you get hungry. Right? You're not feeling the same, and then you start thinking, what do I need to do to suppress this, to fill myself up? Emotions are the same way. So we house emotions, and fear will come up, and disappointment will come up, and we don't know. That's the emotional memory in the limbic system. And so the emotional reasoning is when that comes up, we then start reasoning it away, rather than going, whoa, what is this? What's going on here? Why am I constantly feeling sick to my stomach when I show up to work? Why is it I feel depressed when I'm around this person? Or why is it that I'm constantly feeling sad? You know what I mean? Or why am I overly happy? It's just what's coming up, rather than pushing it away by being reasonable. Like, oh, it's just because I'm hungry. Even though I use that as an example. Oh, I'm just hungry. Or I don't like that person. Or it's because of this, da-da-da-da-da. You really miss the opportunity to develop intimacy with yourself. And so when this emotion comes up, you just go, okay, this makes sense, emotional reasoning, this makes sense why I'm feeling this way, and you're able to kind of turn the corner very quickly without addressing it. And I'm being very general, but it happens in different ways for different people. That's why I was saying earlier, it's so hard to measure this. Because the reason why I'll be super reasonable, and we all do this on some level. Yeah, we all do this on some level at some time, at some point. It's just when we identify it as a problem, we need to address it. So we all do this, and we do it for different reasons. So whatever's coming up with you, let's just say, for example, fear or insecurity comes up. when going to a networking event. Being super reasonable and going, well, these people really aren't in my industry and they don't have nothing to offer me. And of course, there's other filters coming into this. But I don't have time, and therefore this is not of any value to me. So that's we've just reasoned away insecurity, missed an opportunity, or maybe we had to go because the work told us to go, and we hide in the corner, or we just stay with our coworkers. We don't explore. So however we're super reasonable in terms of pushing that away. It can happen in different levels of people. It happens actually a lot in the bargaining system when we get to bargaining. Like, so for example, beginning of the year, everybody wants to hit the gym. And come the 15th of January, everyone cancels their membership. In the beginning, it's like, hey, yeah, it's that time of year, I want to lose weight, I'm committed to this. And then they get there and it doesn't feel good. It's like it hurts, it's like it's tiring. And then you start going, well, there was traffic today, I'm not going to be able to make it, I gotta go to the bank, I gotta go see such, and it's like next thing you know, you don't have time. That's the super, and again, it's different for everybody.
I also, I'm just learning about this about myself as well, so it's, I'm in the right place, I guess, to learn all this. But how I am reasoning my emotions is I feel the emotion, and if it's something I don't want to feel, I push it away, and then I go to something productive. What's going to make me feel better? Oh, how am I going to reach this goal? If it's a problem, say with my relationship or my child or whatnot, instead of feeling that worry or fear or stress, I just push it down, and then I say, oh, okay, well then I can do this to fix that, is how I
That's a
reason
great example.
It's
So
how
that's
I
the other
reason
end
it
of
out.
it.
Yeah, I reason it out like that. And
Okay.
then I'm supposed to sit with you're supposed to sit with your feelings.
Yeah.
And
I have a
then just
friend who
let it
does
flow
that.
through, but-
I have a friend who does it. You just like triggered the other end of it. What she does is, she's a great person. She's a therapist. Great person.
That's what I work with.
Soup. Extremely beautiful. Should be with somebody, but she's in her late 30s. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but I just know what she's doing. And she'll meet somebody, and then she'll start to reason away why she shouldn't be in this relationship. So there's a lot of sabotage. So love comes up, happiness comes up, and then she reasons it away. And she's her own worst enemy because she's a therapist. She can reason away in a very intellectually, biased way. She can put numbers to it. This person does this, therefore statistically they're going to be on this trajectory. Super, super reasonable. It's not a fit. But really, I tell her all the time, you're just in love. And you're trying to protect yourself by being super reasonable. And so, this is the sad part, and I'm glad I'm not using her name, none of you know her, is that she has me included, I'm one of her guy friends, lifelong friend. In fact, she's a very close friend. Never dated her, but I've seen this. Is that she has all these guy friends around her. And she'll say that these are her friends, but what she's doing is really creating mistrust in the guy that she may be dating, and he leaves. And so it becomes too risky. And she goes, well, he's just a friend. But no, you just got done telling me so it's just like she sabotages it. Another famous word is super reasonably can be super sabotaging. So that was a great example. On one hand, we can talk about the destructive things that we do with insecurity, but it happens with love and happiness too. Yeah. That was a great question. Super reasonable. Yeah. So I'll
Brian, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
I greatly appreciate you conducting this class. I learned quite a bit. I do not know how much I'm going to be able to apply, but I'll definitely give it a shot.
Yeah, and I know that's true. There's just so much in this workshop, information. I'm really, that's my weakness, is how do I boil this down so that people take away and go, okay, bam, I can do that. But I'm just like, the 3 steps thing, 3 steps that you can do at the end, that's an example. You don't have to take this, nor is it expected for you to run the marathon today. Train with one idea. That's my suggestion. Don't take everything and allow it to overwhelm you. Take one thing and then just train with that. Train with that.
let me just share one example. I'm going to expose my wife here. So my wife's she was 5th year at Apple. She's an executive admin. She just gets her promotion in January. She's working for the guy that runs her department, right? And so it's a new relationship for both of them. He's married with 4 kids. My wife and I are married. We have 3 boys. They're all grown. His is still in the stages we once were at. And Jody's trying to build this relationship with her boss. Really good guy, but she sees this cynical, and he's an attorney, cynical, contemplative person. But she also sees this side that when he talks about his family, there's one thing, she's trying to build a relationship. My takeaway today, back to my wife, I said, she just wants to be herself. I said, well, you need to take off your mask so he can take off his mask.
Patiently.
It's because it's pacing, because I think when you have a background in corporate America, it's easy to be I'm going to use the word cynical and contemplative, because there's always a risk and reward, right? Because the bottom line is the bottom line, right? Like, especially if you're working for a company that's on the stock exchange, so, they're managing profit for their shareholders, their stakeholders, right?
Yes.
The reality of it is you're in a world where whether you embrace it or not, you're in a world where you're responsible for all these families, right? Without it being said, you've hired all these people that are working to take care of their families. So how do you be, vulnerable enough, take off your mask enough to let I have a family. You're working to take care of your family. We just met that. You're working to take care of your family, right? So you don't want to show weakness, because it could impact your family, right? So the thing about it is getting that level where your team trusts you, and you can take it to the sports level. The first thing I go to is the University of Alabama. They've won all these national championships, and Nick Saban's all this kind of, accolade, makes $14 million a year as a coach. He doesn't want to show any weakness. But when you read stuff about him, where he takes his mask off, is when they go in the locker room. Because all these kids want to go to Alabama, not just to get the NFL, because they see a real person in there that cares about their family, whether they're on the first string or the 4th string. He's built a family dynamic at that university.
Yeah, that's a great example.
You know.
You ever heard Gandhi's quote, "Be the change that you want to see in the world. Be the person that you want to see in the other." It applies,
That's what I'm trying to do at work.
Yeah.
Isn't it tough to do though?
Yes.
Yes. And
That's why a lot of
I
people
don't
don't
know,
do it.
and I don't know how these great personalities pull it off.
Well, there's another dynamic. So there's, go back when Apple got founded, it was Steve Jobs, Steve Wozniak.